we met quite a while ago, but you know, when you are a small startup like KYP, you know, these big guys are not accessible. Right? So although you may be dreaming to meet them, you line up in a long, long queue of people that dream, for instance, of partnering with SAP. It's not easy. Luckily, Gero is a clever man, and he has his disciples all over the place. And one of them is laughing now because, you know, we had some good food, and he said, actually, you know, you could help us. That's how it started. We have prepared for you 3 blocks of the journey. We're going to talk about Gero. It's a fantastic story. It's a phenomenal story of an entrepreneur that made it. Right? There's lots of entrepreneurs, you know, that most of the companies are failing before reaching 1 million of revenue. And he went way, way above it, right? Long, long story. So first piece about Gero, second piece about the acquisition. That's a very interesting story, not only because of the skyrocketing SAP share price connected to that, and then number 3 is obviously the collaboration part that we are going to discuss a little bit. So welcome to the discussion, and of course we have coverage in the background. Gero, you come from a family of entrepreneurs, but for some reason you were not immediately attracted to being an entrepreneur. Why?
Yeah, that's true, and thank you for the very kind introduction. So indeed, so all of my childhood I was surrounded by entrepreneurs. My uncle, he was one of the pioneers of solar panels and created one of the first companies in that area. My father, he built lasers for industrial production, also created a number of companies in that space. Both went bankrupt multiple times, not only with their companies, but also running into private insolvency. So it's one of those interesting moments when people stand in front of your house, your mother doesn't know what's going on, and your dad says, ooh, one of the credits went bust again, the house is foreclosure, the auction is next week. We will have to move. So these are the types of moments where you think, ooh, the price is pretty high for having your own company and pursuing your passion of wanting to bring your technology, your products to market. So I had a lot of reasons not to create a company, but sometimes the pull is just too hard and you can't resist.
So what made you go for it?
So look, so I'm an engineer by background, right? So what interests me personally is trying to see what can we do with technology, and then really, you know, celebrating when you have these breakthroughs, when you can build something that didn't exist before. And I started at the university building an open source project because that was like a cool thing to do back in the days. If you have good technology, you have as many people look at it as possible. And in an academic environment, open source is the way to go. But we had a problem financing the whole thing. And so I learned one trick very, very early. If you're proud of the technology that you built and you want to make that technology survive, what's the trick?
You have to bootstrap probably all, guys.
Make customers pay for it. So this is the trick to make great technology survive. As long as nobody's paying for it, the technology will surely die a very painful death. If you have customers who believe in this and who actually open up their wallets to prove their love, this is the way to go, and you can only do that if you have some construct to write invoices and those types of things. So the reason really building a company was to be able to sign the first contract around the technology, so that the customer, in our case, the first customer was AOK Health Insurance, large public health insurance company here in Germany. And they said, well, you know, we need to contract with somebody. We want to make sure that in a couple of years' time, you know, there is something that still takes care of this. And so this was the birth of Signavio.
Now, how many entrepreneurs do we have in the room? Who has their own company? Raise your hand, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. How many entrepreneurs to be do we have in the room? Ignore your bosses. Raise your hand. Okay, nobody? 1? Okay, good. 2. Okay. Okay, so it's at least relevant for 2 people, right? It's better than nothing. And as Suresh said earlier, you know, small number of people can create a big change. So, you know, there is always hope for us. Now, your project started with the revenue in mind, which actually, you know, a couple of years ago was not very common, right? People were going after VC money and they thought, you know, I get all these millions. Mirek is always telling me a story. He went once to one of these fancy AI conferences and met a company that was also funded by one of the VC that invested in KYP. And they spent a month on Hawaii strategizing, right? I thought it's a brilliant idea, and we never did it. But the story behind is that there are not many that think about revenue and survival before they plunge into big investments. There was an open source story at the university. Tell us more about that.
So I had a very visionary colleague that I shared my office with. So I did a PhD. And Hagen, my office colleague, he could always see the future. And he had an interesting biorhythm. He always, worked at night and then slept until like 1 or 2 p.m. and then came into the office, always saying the same thing. Gero, you won't believe it. And I finished the sentence, I have seen the future last night. Because he said that every day. And one of his visions was how the computer of the future would look like. So this was back in 2006. And he said, Gero, I have seen the future, the computer of the future in my dreams. And I said, oh, interesting. How does it look like? He said, it has a screen. Surprise, surprise. It has a keyboard or some other input device. I'm not sure about that. I said, okay, very surprising. It is connected to the internet. Wow, that's revolutionary. And the only piece of software that is installed on that computer is a web browser. It does not have a hard drive. It doesn't store any information locally. Everything that you do with that computer is you open it up, it has a web browser, and everything that you do with that computer comes through that web browser. Actually, the Chromebooks appeared like 5, 6, 7 years later, so that vision became a reality. But what was interesting was the thought back in 2006, at a time when 99% of the work was done on desktop installed software, like Microsoft Office or your FET clients or your software development environment or whatever you had installed on the computer. This was an interesting thought to imagine a world where everything would be delivered through the web browser. At a time when Google Chrome didn't exist yet, at a time when the first version of Firefox came out, at a time when Microsoft didn't support any open web standards. So it was a daring thought. But interesting, we loved complex user interfaces, and we thought, well, how great would it be of a challenge to be able to build the most complex user interface and bring that to the web browser. And we said, we had a tool that was called Writely that we found on the internet, which was later acquired by Google and is now called Google Docs. And we were so amazed, this was back in 2006, we were so amazed by having a Microsoft Word-like experience on the web browser. And we said, next one up is PowerPoint or Visio. So let's build the Visio or the PowerPoint in the web, and that didn't exist. Nobody else had tried that. And so we said, let's convince a bunch of people who join us on that journey. And it was the 6 of us then, a week later, who started the open source project and worked on it for 2.5 years at the university. So yeah, but interesting enough is, for the first 2 years, we had no clue. We knew what the technological challenge was that we solved, but we had no clue what the user challenge was that we solved. And only later we realized that what we solved was making it very easy for people to bring in colleagues and collaborate, right? Because before, in the process world, you only had 2 or 3 experts only that would discuss a process and envision how the best process would look like going forward. But the other hundreds and thousands of people who have insights and ideas about what's wrong with the process or what can be improved would be ignored. And this was a time when YouTube was launched, or when Wikipedia became strong, when Facebook launched in Europe. So this was exactly that time. And so this idea of social networks, collaboration, crowdsourced innovation, all these types of things was a big trend. And we thought maybe that trend translates into the enterprise. Yammer emerged, was bought by Microsoft, first enterprise social network, which was the starting point for SharePoint. So all of these data points emerged in the 2000s, and we thought maybe this pattern can be applied to the business process world as well. And we started pitching the idea of democratization of process improvement and getting everybody involved. And we talked about generations earlier, millennials kind of having a different say in the enterprise and not wanting to take orders, but want to create. So this was a grand pitch that we had, and it turned out it worked.
I can relate to it. I was cleaning up my Google Drive and I found presentations. Is Hans-Jörg in the room? Close your ears. From the era when I was reporting to you, where Google Docs was the perfect way to collaborate with people from all over the globe on business ideas. Right? You would jump on the call and craft stuff together. Nothing of it succeeded, so unfortunately, we also had with Mirek 2 ideas that were not launched before KYP, but I can relate to these thoughts. Now, how many McKinsey alumni or existing employees do we have in the room? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, 4 people. Let's connect that. You are an alumni of McKinsey. How did it help, if at all, creating Signavio success story? And then, you mentioned your PhD, right? So there is also a university story, and my feedback I received from Polish colleagues when I announced that I'm doing my PhD was, okay, this loser will not get a job, therefore he needs to go for a PhD. That was it, and some of them still don't understand how it changes your trajectory in countries like Germany. So tell us about the influence from these both aspects, if they helped at all.
Yeah, this was very interesting. It was look, I was a geek, like mid-20s, no clue about most things, and then you get sent in, and the moment you say I'm from McKinsey, people listen to you, and they think everything that you say is the biggest piece of wisdom they've ever heard. And I had this interesting task 4 weeks in, so it was a small project, short-term project with Deutsche Telekom. And I got the task and said, Gero, we want to get some follow-on project here. Can you please do a quick calculation of the value that we generated the last 4 weeks? And so I opened up an Excel. I never did that before in my life, and I put a couple of value drivers and things, and I pulled together from the reports that we did, attributing a lot of that, of the change to us. So my calculation said first 4 weeks, value generated for Deutsche Telekom was 480 million euros. And the number just looked so outrageous, and I went to my boss and said, I produced just a phenomenally big number. I think it's complete bogus, but this was so much fun to build the Excel. And he said, oh, this looks actually very good. And he took the exact same Excel to the client, and we signed on the follow-on project because we did such an amazing job. So, joking aside, and McKinsey does amazing things, okay? So I don't want to talk anything bad about the company. We did tremendous things there. But one thing that I learned was it depends on the narrative. It depends on who you talk to. And looking for value is just so powerful because you can talk about so many things, but connecting it back to the numbers that matter for the company in front of you is just plain powerful. Is it always so easy to dissect? Like, do you have like a 2% impact or a 5% impact or an 80% impact? This is where the science gets kind of, fizzles out a little. So it's not all that exact. But having that conversation with a customer around, how do we make your company better? Not just by feeling better or having a super cool prototype or whatever, but how does it fundamentally change how you operate and what you do? And it prepares you for the future. This is the conversation that you always want to aim for.
Awesome, isn't it? I think McKinsey got a bit inspired now. Looking back, what advice would you give to people that raised earlier their hand or didn't do it, but they mean it, that are still hesitating to set up their own company?
Yeah, my advice would be don't do it. It's the most horrible thing that you can ever do. I mean, it's the failure rate is just incredible. The amount of pain and suffering that you're going through is just insane. You know, your partner will think you're crazy. You will have no time for your friends anymore. So why on earth would you do it? If after all of these things you still say, but I have no other chance, there is no other way for me, then do it. But you know, starting a company has become so fashionable. You sit there with your MacBook and this, you know, with your matcha latte, and you're, you know, solving this massive problem for the world. It's like it's so ridiculous. And so starting a company is really not a lifestyle choice. But good news is there are enough people who are crazy enough who still pursue it against all odds, and sometimes some successes come out of that. So maybe you're among them.
Very inspiring, huh? Mirek, are we resonating with this summary? Okay, yeah. I've never foreseen all those challenges, but we're going to the next chapter. Signavio and SAP story. I don't know whether you've seen this post, but it was one of the most liked and commented posts that you can imagine, and we took this screenshot very early.
So here you see my math skills at work. You know, the strong correlation here. Scientific exercise went into this.
Who is SAP shareholder here? Nobody? I am. Okay, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so very few people. Please, these few people that have shares of SAP, give him a big round of applause for what was done. SAP was one of the first shares I bought for my kids, and they are big fans of this company. They still have no clue what you're doing, but they say it's a good abbreviation, this SAP, and they think KYP will be the same, but you know, we know the difficulties. Okay. If you would have to describe in one sentence the value that Signavio brought or brings every day to SAP, what would it be?
Well, plain and simple, we're the future of SAP. That would be the one sentence. The longer answer is SAP is an incredible company that has done amazing things for the past 50 years, mostly in the ERP space. We feel there are business opportunities that go beyond ERP, and we're actively pursuing several of these, you know, growth drivers, and we're one of them, and proving the assumptions right so far. The scale of SAP is great and intimidating at the same time. So if you want to build something that matters on the scale of SAP, it means you need to add like billions and billions and billions of revenue every year to be able to make a dent and to move the needle for the company. So this is a challenge in and of itself, but challenges, this is what makes life interesting.
And we heard that Klein was one of your champions in the company, right?
Correct. So the background of Christian is he only worked for one company, SAP. He started during his studies already, but he had many roles within SAP. One of the roles, for example, was he was the CFO of SuccessFactors after the acquisition of by SAP, and he was very involved in integrating many of the newly acquired cloud companies, Concur, Ariba, you name them. And so he discovered his love for process management, for process improvement back in the days, because he found that, you can add the numbers up financially, and you can do all kinds of tricks of assuming these puzzle pieces fit together. But as long as you don't look at the business processes, you are not going to leverage what this company knows and be able to extrapolate that to the wider SAP. Nor will you be able to work as an integrated one going forward. So he introduced that emphasis of business processes, bringing together kind of core strengths of SAP that existed, but also looking at these pockets of excellence within the newly acquired companies, because they were much more significant from a cloud development, cloud delivery, cloud operations point of view than core SAP was. And then bringing that back to the breadth of the organization. This was his task at the time. And he knew that he would have to activate thousands of people within SAP and that technology can help do that. So he was the champion buying Signavio licenses back in 2014, a long time ago. And SAP was a crazy customer for us because, first of all, it was the first kind of large enterprise deal that we ever signed. For the first 12 months, 75% of all feature requests from our entire customer base came from one customer, that was SAP. And also the usage numbers were crazy. So at peak times, we had 20,000 monthly active users on our software. Something of that scale we hadn't seen before with any of the other customers. So, but it was great. So they were really committed to rolling this out very broadly within the company. They made great success. And this is also what Christian made his career on, because he was so successful bringing the company together and appreciating also the complexity of running a business like this, and not just telling a nice narrative and doing lip service, but knowing what needs to be done in the background to make all of these great visions happen. It's fascinating that Christian was one of the first people who has a business process background to move all the way up to CEO of the company. And he still does a phenomenal job. SharePrice is a testament also to a lot of the decisions that he made along the way. And this was also the segue. Once he became CEO, he became sole CEO in the summer of 2020. That was kind of the segue into the conversations that led to the acquisition.
And predecessors were not that successful, which you see, by the way, over there in the share price evolution, right? So on his behalf, big thanks. And I want to address now all customers that are present here. In case you happen to become the CEO of your current employer, don't forget about us, okay? And in this context, SAP Signavio acquisition was one of the largest, if not the largest, tech exit in the history of Germany. What made this deal possible? What were the critical success factors?
So first and foremost, there was a strategic fit that came from both sides. So one, Christian becoming new CEO, and what you always do when you become a CEO of such a large company, you call in, McKinsey or BCG or somebody else to reformulate your strategy, and then you define 4 growth areas, not less, otherwise it's unsure, but not more, otherwise you lose focus. So exactly 4. And then you take your best people from across the organization to start executing against that. So and he had his right hand who helped him craft the strategy. His name is Reuven Morato, and he raised his hand and said, "I'm up for a new challenge. I would love to build this new thing." So and they started scanning the market for what was happening out there in the business process space. So Christian said, here's the story. So the story is, SAP needed to take all of these on-premise ERP customers to the cloud, okay? So this is where a lot of that revenue growth that we're currently experiencing is coming from. So, but if you tell the customer the narrative is, say, dear customer, I force you to move because I end maintenance, and by the way, I want to get 20-30% more from you with the cloud subscription versus what you paid with maintenance, how does that sound? And it's going to be a hundreds of millions, sometimes billions euro project to get off that old ECC on-premise system to get to the S4HANA cloud thing. How does that sound? The customer would say, it sounds terrible, right? I get a new system that does the exact same thing that the old system did before, and I pay more. And I have a project of a couple of €100 million, and the risk of the project, it goes through the roof. If the project fails, I lose my job, and we as a company lose a ton of money. And in the worst case, our factories will stop producing. So of course, it sounds terrible. So he needed to change the narrative, right? And the narrative was changed in a way to say, well, not only do we give you a new version of ERP software, but we give you a new version of yourself. Think about that. Who do you want to be in the future, right? And everybody wants to be better. Everybody dreams of something grand, right? But it was not SAP that you would have that conversation with, right? And so the narrative was, we need to get back to that conversation with the customer, so that we're the trusted party, not only to give you a new version of software, but a new version of yourself. And to make that real, there needed to be, proof to the story, right? And the Signavio acquisition was a perfect proof point that SAP invests and means it, and actually has own products and software to make that happen. But there's always two to tango, okay? So we were on a path to say we're the greatest company ever. We go IPO, right? We grow. The slowest growth we ever had in Signavio's history was 55% year over year. The fastest years were much, much faster. And we did that every year. And so this is a classical IPO candidate at some point if the market window is open. And so we had no pressure whatsoever, well capitalized, everything, running pretty efficiently. But I'm an engineer, okay? So and I'm a product person by heart. So what drives me is always the question of what's the next thing that we can make possible. With the things that we wanted to do in the past, we've proven it. We have millions and millions and millions of users out there who use the software for exactly what it was designed for. That's great, check. But what's next? And I dreamed of a system that you would plug in an organization. At the push of a button, it would tell you who you are, what you're doing, what's going well, what's not going well. It would tell you these are the 5 most urgent areas for you to investigate and to improve upon. And by the way, here's the plan, the 5 most urgent things that you start doing on Monday morning so that you reap the benefits on this item already in the next 3 months, on these items in the next 2 years. I was dreaming of such a product, right, back in 2019, 2020. But we hit a wall because, for example, one of the things we needed was data, benchmarking data across, ideally, all business processes that companies have, ideally across all KPIs that are relevant to measuring a process's performance, across all industries, across all company sizes, across all geographies, right? This is what you need to build a product like that. And we started out and try to buy this type of data because our install base, even if you have 2,000-3,000 customers, it's not enough as a data.
This is what Mirek was talking about during his session. Most of tech companies nowadays lack data, right?
Absolutely. That's why, when the cloud arrived, startups had an edge, right? Because when the cloud arrived, it was all about iterating fast around the user, right? And if you get your iteration cycles under control and super, super fast, you will simply provide the best cloud service. This was the name of the game 15 years ago with the advent of cloud. Now with AI, it's different. Everybody can pull in an OpenAI model or DeepSeek or whatever comes out next, right? And build it into a product. You only build differentiated AI capabilities the moment you have access to something that nobody else has. And this is what we lacked pre-acquisition. And when SAP reached out, one of the first questions I asked was, what kind of data do you have? And so we looked into that. And SAP were already developing a product internally to harness the data points that they have. And they were very smart many years ago to already change customer contracts. So at a very aggregated level, SAP is indeed able to, for benchmarking purposes, to leverage data. And so the two to tango, the other side that made it very compelling for us was the outlook that we could build products that we simply couldn't build as a standalone startup. And now fast forward to today, last year, 65% of our revenue of our new revenue, of new bookings, we did with products that didn't exist at the time of acquisition, right? So this is, this constant wheel of reinvention of jumping onto the next generation and building a product for what is most relevant and most successful at that point in time.
Excellent story, and again, power of data stressed properly. Fast forward to the close of the acquisition process, and a bit on the personal front. How did it feel, both on personal and professional level, and more importantly, was it feeling like a beginning of something, just as you described it, or ending of something?
Look, this was a very conscious choice, and it's easier to say yes if you said no 5 times before. So we had a lot of interest, by all kinds of companies, and we always said no, because we couldn't imagine ourselves being part of that organization. So I'm a people person throughout. That's why I called the book Together as One. Because the people dimension was the one defining piece that made the Signavio success story up in this point and into the future. And SAP was the first company that reached out to us that not only was a great fit on the product side, but where we said, oh, these people are really, really nice. And we have a lot of fun working with them. I could imagine, really looking forward to every workshop that I have with these types of people. So this was very, very different to the experiences that we had before. But we had this long catalog, right? So, starting in consulting, at some point you built these pros and cons in like pages and pages and pages. But if you just counted the points of pros and cons, the pros were like 5 times more than the cons. Was a very conscious choice. I validated it with a number of people. So we went into it open eyes with certain expectations, of course, but it turned out really, really well. So no, the feeling was good, and the positive reaction to that was also, a great reaffirmation that this was the right thing. On the day of the announcement, I got 250 love letters from SAP employees who said, Gero, finally you have arrived where you belong. I said, oh, that's very kind of you. 250. I counted them. 255. So that was very nice.
They happily lived ever after. Now, I'm going to dig into this story because it sounds too rosy. We are here in a small group. Any particular challenges or something that surprised you, hurdles that you had to face in spite of these love letters?
Look, of course, suddenly you operate in a very large context, right? So at the time of acquisition, we were a little bit more than 400 people at Signavio. Now we're around 2,000. SAP overall is more than 110,000. So you operate in a larger context. Suddenly you have, procurement is a pain, and suddenly there are all of these rules and red tape for all kinds of things. So if you start a fight against all of that, you will go crazy. But summing it all up, the level of autonomy that I have now is greater than with the financial investors before. And we have a much more long-term view. With the financial investors before, it was a lot like current quarter, next quarter. Every investment we make, Gero, prove it to me that within 18 months this will, show up in revenue uptake. Now it's like, Gero, what's the plan for in 5 years or 10 years from now? What are we doing today to do what we need to do in 10 years? So it's a lot more longer term. But then there are all these, things that you inherit from a large company that can pull you down at some point, right? So I don't know. Doing a roll backwards on D&I last Friday, I don't know. We didn't. Don't quote me on that, but we didn't need that.
Awesome. Now, we're moving to the next stage of our discussion, collaboration between the two companies. And what you're seeing in the background is going to be shown in SAP Sapphire, the largest event on the planet in Orlando next week. So no pictures or no videos, please. But you can watch and remember everything.
But it's not rolling.
I think it is. That's SAP guys.
Okay, because somebody's speaking and we're not hearing.
Yeah. So
I get it.
Just just for the sake of a bit of excitement, from process intelligence to productivity intelligence, right? So combining the two value propositions. You said once fast time to insight and fast time to adapt are critical priorities in today's business environment. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so we even didn't invent it, so I just copied that from rephrased a little bit, but copied it from McKinsey actually, that those transformations, there's a strong correlation between successive transformations and the speed of which you can provide tangible improvements to the organization. And if you then break that further down to our domain, it's one, you want to have it ideally at the push of a button, but at most within hours and days, you want to get an understanding where you stand, what's working, what's not working, but also what's the solution space to go about it. And then the second piece is, how long does it take you from making a decision to change to actually having that change come to life? And this has a people dimension, but this has also a technology dimension, and change is hard. So being able to bring that down. There's this joke, so SAP has this Activate methodology. I don't know if you heard of it, but when you implement ERP, they call it Activate, SAP Activate. It's like, certain steps that you take. When entering SAP, I had never heard of that before. I thought, Activate, wow, that's cool. That's a button inside of SAP, and when I want to make a change, I hit that button, boom, and everything has changed, right? And then they told me, no, Activate is a typically 18-month project. And I said, oh, we need to bring that down to a click of a button. Let's make that our challenge. So long story short, so this is this fast time to insight, fast time to adapt. It's just proven that it correlates with company success. Now, what does it have to do with our partnership? Fast time to insight is we call this enterprise observability. So the question is, how much do you know about what's going on inside and outside of your company? And you often start somewhere, and then you need to connect the different dots to get a complete picture. That was also the reason why we acquired LeanIX for kind of the application portfolio dimension and WalkMe. But we identified that we have a number of white spots. We always have white spots, but our dream still is enterprise observability, right? We're particularly good in capturing all of the events that happen in backend systems for many of the commoditized business processes. So we probably capture 70–80% of that pretty much out of the box. But then you have, for the more differentiated areas or where you're very different, it's harder to get that understanding. But even more so, we don't see with our products what happens in front of the screen, right? So what happens through the eyes of the user? How does their world look like? And now, in particular, as we're moving to agentic, we're emulating the power of looking at things through, like, what kind of superhuman human being could you imagine doing the job for you through advanced automation, right? It tends to be a great framing and scoping vehicle to look at what are the building blocks. We use these building blocks called people in the past to build organizations, and they happily coexist and work together and so on and so forth. Let's replicate that pattern. And so also, when accepting that this is the right way of scoping and framing it, then, of course, it's a great vehicle of getting there, of observing what the actual people, the human people do, and how they struggle or what they do or what makes their day. So, and this is something that we don't capture with the Signavio products and don't intend to build. And so in these cases, we're always happily reaching out and see who are the leading players out there in the market. And you came out on top. And so that's why we're working very happily. We built you into the Sapphire Showcase as well. We made you a central part to our Gartner Magic Quadrant story. So it's a combined story, KYP and Signavio, that we submitted that. And so yeah, it's just a perfect combination. And we would love to do everything ourselves, but we also have to realize we can't. And in some cases, it's smarter just to go to the smartest and most driven and coolest people out there to team up with them.
Thank you for the flowers.
That was you.
We have to deserve them. Excellent discussion. Thank you very much. I hope you found it exciting. I'm just sad that we should finish, but I will allow one question from the audience if you have using the opportunity of having Gero on stage. Lena, please.
Thank you. How did you manage to get on board that, like, a big company as SAP? You said that you were startup, probably walking through the events for startups, pitching. I was in VC business before, so I'm just wondering, how did you manage to catch this kind of big fish to be able to pitch even to them?
You mean when we signed them on as a customer?
Like, yeah, like just like enter the door, you know, like just to listen to them, to have them to listen to your pitch or.
You know, you would be surprised how much interest in the world around SAP is within SAP, and how many people there are who do nothing else than looking at the world around SAP. So, perfect example, Manuel, who's here. This is, you know, most of what he does is engaging externally, looking at what are the startups, what's the new technology, what are the things that match with what we're trying to achieve. And actually, I would think when it comes to startup engagement, if I just look at our unit, and it's the same for other units as well, that the outreach that we proactively do out there is probably of a similar magnitude than the other way around, because there's so much going on, especially now with AI, that you know, it's important for us to stay on top and be engaged with many of these companies very early. I mean, the pace, the time it takes from like starting the company to, you know, X traction, X million in revenue, and so on, has compressed so much now that we have AI and the ability to build wonderful products, that we can't allow ourselves the time to sit there and watch 2, 3, 4 years and see how the things unfold. No. So it's our goal to be there like weeks after they did something amazing or launched, and have the first conversation already, if it makes sense for us. So it's different to what probably would expect from SAP, or how SAP operated like 10, 20 years ago. We know speed is of the essence, and we're not alone in this world, and we better team up with all of the smartest people out there.